Welcome to another episode of Unload, brought to you by On the Other Hand. In today's episode, we're going to be unboxing and reviewing this bad boy right here. This is a blue, and yes, it is a blue Snowball by Blue Microphones. We're going to be learning a little bit about this bad boy, so stay tuned. All right, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Jeremy Quintanilla. This is another episode of Unload, again brought to you by On the Other Hand. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the blue microphone, Blue Snowball. And again, yes, mine is actually blue, but I do have an orange one right over there. And we are going to be learning a little bit about this, but before we get started with the unloading of this or the unboxing of it, go ahead and hit the subscribe button right here, and then also make sure that you like this video. If there's something that any questions that you have regarding this, go ahead and put something in the comments. There's also a link in the description box to Amazon to purchase this bad boy if you would like to get it. I love them. I think they're great. They're less than the Blue Yeti, and they work for pretty much everything that you would need them to work for as far as a USB microphone would be concerned. So let's go ahead and do the unloading of this right now. All right, this is the Blue Snowball. Unloading USB microphone, micro USB. Comes in at the time that this was made. Electric blue, neon green, bright orange. Let's take a look at the box. Look at that. PC Mac compatible. Alright, cool features. Dual capsule CD quality microphone for superior sound. Multiple mic patterns, USB cable, rugged adjustable mic stand. All right, specifications: plug and play design, plug and play, superior sound, mic stand and cable, and it's perfect for the following: music, communication, podcasting, and voiceover. And we're back to the front. All right, let's go ahead and unload this bad boy. All right, so this is the guide. The first part's in English, the other part's in a different language. But USB microphone user guide. It talks about the technical specifications on the front. We're going to go over those in a little bit more detail. The transducer type, the polar pattern, and the sampling frequency, essentially. There's 3 different settings for this. The first 2 are a specific type of polar pattern, ones with less decibels. The third position is going to be a different polar pattern, and I'm going to go over those in detail as well. But if we flip through this book, there's a picture of the frequency response rates, and then the polar response, and then how to set it up. Microsoft setup procedure, a Windows setup procedure, and here it has Windows XP and Vista, but obviously Windows 10 works because that's what I use. Suggested applications are for podcasting, home video, voiceover, instant messaging, and then music. And then there's also the ringer, which is an optional shock mount for the Snowball. I do have 2 of those for each of my Snowballs. And then software setup, which it works for pretty much all software that can read the USB port, which is all software for the most part. And then that's essentially the user guide right there. All right. So I actually opened this and thought that I was recording, and something happened with the phone, so I packed it all back up, and we're reopening the box, so that's exciting. This is a USB cord, which I did not open yet, and then this is the mic stand, which I did open, but it's a tripod. It's pretty simple. This extends, this tightens that. The only problem that I have is if this isn't tightened, it doesn't screw into the ball very well. And so let's set that aside. Let's take a look at the ball itself. Take a look in there. It's empty, except for that guy. All right, let's take this bad boy out. And there it is, the blue snowball. And this is an actual blue snowball by the Blue Microphone Company. If you've watched other videos of this, you'll know what I'm talking about, because a lot of the times it's a different color. Like I have an orange snowball, but essentially Blue's signature trademark blue or branding. And then this goes on when you plug it into the USB port. This is where you switch between the different settings, 1, 2, and 3, and then this is the port where the USB goes. So let's change angles. I'll show you how it mounts to the tripod, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the tech specs. Okay, so again, this is all that the microphone is. It's very simple and very easy to use. This is the stand, this is the ball, screw it on like I did. And then you have this USB cord, and USB cord's pretty, just regular USB cord. So if we take this off here, which apparently I can't do very well, so maybe this USB is more complicated than I thought it was, or this USB cord. Anyway, okay, so this is the cord. It's got the regular USB port and then the part that plugs into the back of the blue snowball, which is right there. So then that goes in like so. This goes in the USB port. Once you plug it in, it essentially is plug and play. It works right away. I already set up the orange snowball. Works great, excuse me. Works great. Once you plug it into the computer will recognize the microphone. It works with both Windows and Mac, and it requires 64 megabytes of RAM, and it works with GarageBand, it works with Logic, Cubase, Audacity. At the time that it came out, there was questions on whether or not it worked with Pro Tools, but now it does work with Pro Tools. It works with Corel, Movavi. If I'm pronouncing that right, I have it. I don't know how to pronounce it. And then it works with Adobe. So it works pretty much with any software that allows you to plug and play a USB drive. And as long as it picks up that USB cord, as long as it picks up that USB cord, then it's going to work for the microphone. And with the products themselves, when you open up the product, when you do a drop-down box to switch the input for it, it literally says Blue Snowball on there. You just click on that, and then it'll start picking up the blue snowball, and then you can set it to whatever polar pattern that you want for whatever your needs are. So we're gonna go ahead and talk about that a little bit in the tech specs. So here are the tech specs. All right, so let's take a look and see if I can get it on this. I had a hell of a time trying to get this on this when I got the orange one. I don't know if you can see it right behind me, like I'm pointing at it, but it's far away. Okay, it's not really that far away. But so essentially, if you don't have, it's easier to screw this in if you have this up and this tightened, and then it just kind of goes right on. But that's essentially it. So there is that. And then if you can see that one behind me, what I have on it here, I'll do this. If you can see that a little bit better, I have a shock mount on it. I do have another shock mount somewhere around here. Actually, I take that back. I didn't get a second shock mount. I only got the one shock mount. So that one's going to be for vocals, and this will be probably for recording my guitar. I'm working on a project called Snow. It's just recordings, it's practice recordings, and then I'll hopefully upload those on. But since this is an unload video, let's go back to talking a little bit more about these blue microphones. That one's an orange microphone. so the first tech spec that we're going to be talking about is going to be the transducer type. And essentially, a transducer is how the microphone physically picks up the sound and converts it into an electrical signal. There are two types of transducers. There's dynamic and then there's condenser. The Snowball is what's considered a condenser, which makes it ideal for instrument or voice, specifically in a studio recording. Condensers have a much greater frequency response and transient response, so you usually use them in a setting that's in a recording studio, or you can use it like the guide says for a podcast if you're instant messaging, or if you're Skyping, or if you're doing an interview, or if you're recording live music in your house, or recording music in your house. It works really great in those types of settings. That's when you usually use condenser microphones. Dynamic microphones are really used on stage because they have a limited frequency response, so they're well suited for high sound pressure levels, which is why they work better on stage, because there's a lot of sound pressure. So when you're using when you're on stage, you would use a dynamic microphone, and then when you're in the recording studio, you would traditionally use a condenser microphone. And those are the two types of transducer types. All right, so we're gonna go right over to the next tech spec. The next tech spec is going to be what's called the polar pattern. And the polar pattern of a microphone is the sensitivity to the sound relative to the direction or angle from which the sound is arriving at the microphone. Another way to think of that is how well the microphone hears the sound from different directions. So it's with the sounds coming into the microphone, the polar pattern is how it's picking up that sound coming in at it from different directions. So the blue Snowball, compared as different than the blue Snowball Ice, the blue Snowball has 3 different polar pattern settings. And that's what's really awesome about this, is because of those 3 different polar pattern settings. So I showed you before, if you look on the back of this, I don't know if you can see it right there, but there's 3 different settings, and there's a switch on here that allows you to switch between 1, 2, and 3. So 1, 2's in the middle, and then 3. So the first type of polar pattern that is in setting 1 is called a cardioid. And it comes from the word cardio, which comes from the Greek word meaning heart, which is really interesting because if you look at the polar pattern, which I'm going to show you right now, if we were to graph on a 2-dimensional plane the polar pattern for the first setting, which is cardioid, that's how the mic picks up that sound. So it comes in mainly from the front, and it doesn't pick it up in the back area. And this is ideal for speech, vocals, and podcasting. So if you're doing something regarding speech, if you're doing podcasting, or if you're just doing vocals, you would have it set to setting 1, which is a cardioid polar pattern, and that will be ideal again for speech, vocals, and podcasting. So if we switch it over to polar pattern 2, that's also going to be a cardioid polar pattern. So the sound's going to be picking up from the front, and it's not going to be picking it up in the back so much. But what the setting 2 does is it drops the decibels by 10. So it's called -10 decibel pad. And so it drops those decibels by 10. So switching to the second setting will reduce the decibel level. And a decibel, again, is a unit of measurement that measures the intensity of sound or the power level of an electrical signal by comparing it with a given level on a logarithmic scale. So reducing the decibel by 10, we're lowering the intensity of the sound. So this setting is really ideal if you have someone that's doing screaming vocals, if there's live music, or other loud noises. If you're a musician and you want to play live and you have this connected to your laptop, you're going to put it on if you're going to put it on setting 2, which is a cardioid polar pattern with negative 10 decibels, and it's going to tighten up the cardioid pattern so that if you start playing your guitar or if you're playing an instrument and you're singing, it lowers that intensity so it doesn't pick it up so loudly and hit higher and stress the way the sound's coming into the speakers. So again, if you are on setting 2, that's going to be ideal for live music or live settings where there's loud noises going on. All right, so the final polar pattern is going to be an omnipolar pattern or omnidirectional. So what the third setting does is it activates the omni capsule. The microphone becomes omnidirectional, and like that sound, it picks up sound from all areas, which is why the round portion of it makes sense, because it's omnidirectional. So you can be talking at it from any area and it's going to pick up that sound. So this is going to be great for conferences, interviews, or environmental recordings. So setting 3 is going to be great for conferences, interviews, or environmental settings. All right, so the last tech spec that is mentioned is what's called the sampling frequency, and the way that it's notated in the guide is sample/word, which is 44.1 KHZ kilohertz and 16 bits. So the 44.1 kilohertz is the sampling frequency. Essentially, the sampling frequency is the rate at which the sound waves are sampled and then used to reconstruct the audio signal when playing it back. 16 bits is essentially the same thing, which is the rate at which sound waves are sampled and converted for audio into playback. What does 44.1 kilohertz and 16 bits have in common? Well, it actually has to do with our ears, which makes sense because it has to do with sound, but mainly has to do with our ears. So there's a guy, his name is Claude Shannon, and there's another guy named Harry Nyquist, and they were engineers among other things, and they created a theorem. And essentially that theorem is called the Nyquist-Shannon sampling theorem. Nyquist implied that the sampling frequency must be greater than twice the maximum frequency one wishes to reproduce. Shannon, who was a mathematician, proved this theorem, and that's why it's called the Nyquist-Shannon sampling theorem. Since human hearing range is approximately 0.02 kilohertz and to 20 kilohertz, then the sampling frequency should be 44.1 kilohertz, and this is an analog to so the sampling frequency is the analog version, and then the 16 bits is the same thing but the digital version of it, since we use a lot of digitaling now. So when we had CDs or compact discs, that was in 44.1 kilohertz when that was analog was converted, and then when we started doing digital recording, it became 16 bits essentially. So they mean the same thing, but it's the way in which our ears pick up with that frequency, and the ideal frequency for that is 44.1 kilohertz or 16 bits. And those are the 3 tech specs. That's the transducer type, which this is a condenser. There's 3 polar patterns. The first polar pattern is going to be cardioid. The second polar pattern setting on it is going to be cardioid with negative 10 decibels. And then the third polar pattern is going to be omnidirectional, which means you can pick up sound from 360 degrees. And then the third tech spec is going to be the sampling frequency, which is how most things are, because that's the best frequency for our ears to pick up the sound. So those are the tech specs.